You can start, Anuj.
Thanks. Welcome, everyone. This is City C Conversations, and I am Anuj Daga. I teach at the School of Environment and Architecture. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to another session of C Conversations, which is coming back after almost a short break, which happens due to festivities here. And it's really nice to kind of welcome all of you back to our program. Just to introduce for all those who may be attending this for the first time, C-City is the school's outreach program. And as a part of this program, we organize a range of events, lectures, symposia, and exhibitions in order to engage with the larger artistic and cultural discursive sphere within and outside the city. We invite a range of diverse spatial practitioners in order to expand our ideas of space and as well as engage with different kinds of modes of thinking about space and city. Our this series particularly is supported by Urban Center Mumbai, and I would like to really acknowledge them and appreciate them for their support. Urban Center Mumbai is a part of the Urban Center Trust, which is a young not-for-profit organization established in 2020 by our city practitioners. It aims to build capacities and create democratic platforms to achieve and demonstrate excellence in the planning of design of rapidly urbanizing urban agglomerations in India. Those who must have followed our page, they must be knowing about the theme for this series of talks at C, which is building agency. And just to introduce and give a short background about what this whole series was about, building agency was conceptualized to address the question of how does architecture become relevant for society today. As the name suggests, it has its a very instrumental duality in place. There are two main dimensions to this question of building agency. First is, how does spatial design shape societal relationships, and how could a spatial practitioner contribute responsibly and potently to the emerging complexities of spatial operation today? So these are the two questions which wrestle together. On one hand, the idea of what architects produce or what spatial practitioners produce, and on the other hand, and the agency that this product holds, and on the other hand, ways in which we can kind of push the agency of spatial practitioners themselves through through widening our ways of engagement with people and society around us. So this series invites a range of spatial practitioners who have been formulating visions, trajectories, questions, methods, and processes through which the environmental apparatus may actually be, configured afresh. And these questions, we expect, will offer interesting and useful directions for contemporary spatial pedagogy and practice. So far, we have had 5 speakers, very interesting speakers from all across the world, speak under this series. The first one was Chal Chal Agency, which was a Colombia and Ahmedabad-based practice, and they brought in the idea of light infrastructures as a way of intervening into the otherwise grid systems that we operate in. The second was Matter practice, which is Matter, which is situated in Goa, where Rituraj Parekh and his partner kind of brought in the idea of publishing as well as a synesthetic practice, where talking about a discourse can kind of open up agencies, new kinds of agencies for the architect. Our third speaker was Swati Janu from the Social Collab, who kind of spoke about how an architect's identity has to be porous and work at different levels, different scales of the urban, the architectural, and the non-material kind of zones. We had Bhavna Gemini from the community agency, who spoke to us about different ways of engaging with the community through devising new methods of workshopping and changing minds of people and also learning from them. We had Chen Yun, who is a curator from Shanghai, and she initiated the Dingai Chao Mutual Aid Society, and she showed us how curation becomes an interesting kind of device to intervene into the politics of social spaces within the city. And in that line of speakers, we are very happy to introduce Coopia today. Coopia is actually a cooperative practice that works through pedagogical and spatial processes for the transformation of territory at various scales. I must say that they are based in Latin America, and all of them are in different parts of the country. And Coopia self-manages, articulates, and develops projects that recognize the agency of spatial practices. And its ethos is composed of 4 principles: to cooperate, to repeat, to redistribute, and to refuse. It was founded in 2019, and currently it comprises of 18 associates from distinct fields of work and experience, who are located between Bogotá, Mexico, and Lima. And today we have with us 3 speakers from 3 representatives, I would say, from Coopia. We have Claudio Raffo. Please pardon my pronunciation of your names. We have Claudio from Lima. We have Felipe from Mexico, and we have Maria from Bogota. And I would really appreciate if you all, as you go on to speak, give a little bit of background about yourselves, because I know that your engagements have been very interesting, and it would be nice to hear from you and how it kind of fed into this very organic form of practice that you've come to form. So with that, I would like to invite our speakers and speakers from Coopia, and over to you. So yeah.
Hello. Firstly, maybe we would like to introduce ourselves. Maybe Felipe, that is currently based in Ciudad de Mexico, can speak first.
Okay, hola. Hello, my name is Felipe. I'm actually, or I was born in Bogotá, in Colombia, but I'm now based in Mexico City, now a year and a half here in Mexico. I studied architecture, unfortunately, but running quickly towards deprofessionalization and running as fast as possible from architecture.
Maybe Claudio and me at the end.
Sure. Good morning, or I should say good afternoon, everyone. I also studied architecture, and making also a postmaster degree, I met Felipe. I would say that I come from a very traditional background of architects, let's say. But I'm also trying to run out of that background and that traditional practice.
Okay, my name is Camila Leal. I'm from Bogotá, and I'm currently in Bogotá, Colombia. I graduated from architectural school in 2019, and I'm very curious about what am I gonna do as an architect. So that's why I'm here in Coopia. Well, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So we are here representing Coopia. As I stated before, we are Claudio, Felipe, me, and other 8 associates in Mexico, Bogotá, and Lima. And we are going to show you a little video about ourselves, what we do, who we are, and well, a little bit about Coopia. So. I don't know why it's failing. We did it like 1 minute ago. Please wait.
Coopia es una práctica cooperativa que trabaja a través de procesos pedagógicos y espaciales para la transformación del territorio y opera en diferentes escalas. Autogestionamos, articulamos y desarrollamos y espaciales para la transformación del territorio y opera en diferentes escalas. Autogestionamos, articulamos y desarrollamos proyectos reconociendo la agencia que tienen las prácticas espaciales y componemos nuestro ethos a partir de 4 principios: cooperar, repetir, redistribuir y rechazar. Coopia inició en el 2019 y actualmente somos 15 asociadas que trabajamos de diferentes campos de trabajo y estamos ubicadas entre Bogotá y la Ciudad de México.
Somos una práctica cooperativa porque creemos en los principios bajo los cuales se...
Maybe we can wait like a minute.
regula, como la ayuda mutua, la equidad, la solidaridad, la democracia directa y el compromiso socioambiental. Coopia se distancia de prácticas asistencialistas de carácter exclusivamente humanitario. Consideramos que el reto no es operar desde una entidad con estos fines, sino desarrollar una práctica crítica y consciente de los retos planetarios que exigen involucrar a todas las formas de vida y sus interrelaciones.
¿Por qué? Constantemente buscamos y proponemos nuevas formas de trabajo. Consideramos que cualquier transformación política, económica, social, cultural y material de las condiciones humanas y ambientales contemporáneas debe empezar fundamentalmente por una transformación radical del trabajo. Es necesario cuestionar la racionalidad del trabajo asalariado que permite la acumulación de capital y riqueza individual por cuenta de una producción colectiva.
Rechazar las búsquedas sesgadas por el lucro, deshacer las estructuras jerárquicas y democratizar el control de los recursos. Buscamos un espacio de acción que practique desde un lugar no dominado por las relaciones asimétricas de poder. Creemos en las bases sociales y comunitarias para desarrollar modelos de asociación desde la autonomía y la horizontalidad. Nuestra existencia nace de la urgencia por explorar formatos transversales que promuevan aproximaciones diversas para la composición de lo colectivo.
¿Y qué hacemos? Autogestionamos y articulamos procesos de colaboración de manera transversal. Es decir, no nos limitamos a disciplinas ni a la transdisciplinariedad, sino que cuestionamos las categorías y herencias disciplinares para cruzar y componer ensamblajes de prácticas que operen en la transformación del territorio. Desde este marco desarrollamos nuestro trabajo a través de prácticas pedagógicas y prácticas espaciales.
¿Para quién? Componemos esta práctica para aquellas personas y agrupaciones interesadas en cooperar, interesadas en la transformación de su territorio espacial, político, económico, social, digital y cultural. Para aquellas personas que cuestionan y deshacen las condiciones normalizadas y que buscan generar redes desde la cooperación.
Aquellas que crean en el libre uso y aprendizaje del conocimiento, que rechacen las formas hegemónicas que son herencias del colonialismo, que luchen por la redistribución de la riqueza y el territorio, que se comprometan con una transformación socioecológica para aquellas que quieran generar proyectos replicables para cuerpos humanos y no humanos.
So that was a few months ago when we were 15. Now we are 11 associates and 6 collaborators. So we expect to do an updated performance of this song that it's called El Diablo by Compa Quinto. Okay, so Coopia is first and foremost a labor project. Within Coopia, cooperativism is understood as a pedagogical practice through direct economic action. We aim to experiment through a new labor smoothness, composing and imagining new solidarities through an open and constant process of resignification of labor. We are committing to open up to new degrees of creative autonomy, to compose new fields of alliances and multiple cartographies of cooperation that encourage ourselves and others. Refusing the profit, seeking rationality of wage labor, might require working collectively, transversally, and cooperatively to transform our conditions and those of the territory. As John Holloway puts it, we are looking for an activity that is self-determined, or at least pushes towards self-determination. In other words, we shall not labor under the command of capital. We shall do what we consider necessary or desirable. The crack is the revolt of doing against labor. Another form of doing pushes against the creation of capital and towards the creation of a different society. In both cases, our doing is at the center. By focusing on doing, we put on our own power at the center of our understanding of society. Our power to do, and therefore our power not to do, and our power to do things differently. Today, work has permeated our entire life. The idea of working without pause, without limits, is perceived as plausible, even normal. New technology and global markets create 24/7 practices across multiple time zones and disciplines. This inherent scheme of precarious labor is in fact also introduced in architectural education. These programs focus on teaching individuals how to perform professional working facets, simulating conditions and standards of reality. Students are subjected to endless working hours to learn skills that would position them in a theoretical favorable work position. As Igea Troyani argues, in higher education, an established patriarchal model of academic labor constructs and obstructs the formation of alternate values and identities of diverse educators and students opposed to concentrating on an economically driven architectural education. Neoliberalism in schools of architecture focuses on the short-term vocational goal of making students instantly employable, efficient factory workers who can maximize the money they can make for their employers. Free student labor undertaken as life projects for outside clients in architecture school is just an exploitative practice. Also, the speed up of labor in contemporary life is no longer confined to work and now extends to the home. The architecture student or academic is hurried and required to spend more time in their university workplace, and if they have a family or career commitments, university favors the family-free people because they are able to be optimally productive. As Katie Wicks observes, the refusal of work is not a complete renunciation of labor, but rather a refusal of the ideology of work as a highest calling or a moral duty. The refusal of work rejects the capitalist control of productions and seeks the reduction of it, and a replacement of capitalist forms of organizations by new forms of cooperation. Thus, refusing labor implies agreements and commitments about its resignification and the conditions in which it is done, in a collective, self-managed, co-managed, and transversal mode of labor that enables the direct participation of the workers in three aspects: means of existence, decision-making, and the redistribution of resources. We reject labor because it is unpleasant to do something as a result of external obligation, and also because it is labor that reproduces capital, that requires a world of injustice that is destroying the planet. The doing we chose is more agreeable by virtue of the fact that we chose it. And it is also an attempt to stop creating capitalism and create a different world and alternative forms of life. The insoluble dilemma of our cracks, the back and forth between hope and despair, is not composed of external forces, but has to do with the organization of our own practice. If we create capitalism, then we can stop also creating it and do something else instead. Hope lies in the dual, self-antagonistic character of human doing. It is through the transversal movement across negation and creation that we refuse labor in a prefigurative manner. We say, fuck architecture. There is not much about architecture that is deserving of our respect. And so, in concern with a prefigurative politics of creation, our message is quite simple. Fuck it. Fuck the hold that it has on our political imaginations. Fuck the violence it engenders. Fuck the inequality it exalts as a virtue. Fuck the way it has destroyed the environment. Fuck the endless cycle of accumulation and the cult of growth and development. Fuck the International Union of Architects and all the think tanks that continue to prop it up to promote it. Fuck Leon Battista Alberti and Le Corbusier for changing with our ideas. Fuck the Villarrex, Koolhaas, and Mies and all the cowardly self-interest architects who seek only the scratch of the back of avarice. Instead of maintaining our forms of doing with the realm of architectural production, subsumed in the logics of capitalism, recognizing and rejecting the conditions that define labor, we move and propose a framework to produce new labor smoothness, practicing and promoting our multiple spatial doings. Through this framework, Coopia builds agency by reaching others, by cooperating and strengthening effective and discursive bonds between associates and collaborators, by continuously recomposing its structures and organization, and by being appropriate and reproducible. Most importantly, building collective agency requires complicity, and we are slowly building complicities in order to compose new fields of alliances through multiple cartographies of cooperation.
Coopia is a practice in constant transformation, an exercise of constant recomposition. The only thing that remains are the four principles that compose our ethos: cooperate, repeat, redistribute, and refuse, to which we may add more. Through cooperation, we experiment and promote collective work models and transversal forms of organization, which in their practice can recognize the capacity of other agents and the possibility for relationships of mutual aid. Through repetition, we seek to subvert the regime of originality and the cult of authentic and the new, insisting on the appropriation and repetition of knowledge, the recovery and reuse of material resources, and the reconversion of spatialities. Through redistribution, we aim to recognize the agency that spatial and pedagogical practices have, in order to question asymmetries and inequalities, and redistribute through inclusive processes that problematize contemporary conditions in terms of access, class, gender, race, and space. Through refusal, we prioritize intentions in order to maintain an ethical exercise of our practice, above individual economic interests or cosmetic attributes. Refusal is not an absolute condition, but a means of transforming the normalized conditions which Coopia refuses. Coopia learns by copying other practices. This means we study, experiment, expropriate, and repeat diverse labor processes. Our methodological and self-governance aspirations are in constant metabolism. Committed to an anti-capitalist form of organization, autonomy, and solidarity, our practice has been experimenting with different collective modes of organization, as anarchism, assembly models, and sociocracy. Rather than refusing power, we aim to experiment with a redistribution of power in order to reclaim potencia as empowering or affirmative power relations and refuse potestas as coercive, restrictive power relations. We organize around an assembly model as a dialogic system of taking decisions and building collective agreements, and have been experimenting with sociocracy as a mode of self-governance. We understand sociocracy as a set of tools that are in constant metabolism, that seek to ensure shared power. In order to share or redistribute power, sociocracy proposes constant dialogue and three pillars: decision-making based on consent, organizational form based on circles or work groups with specific objectives that redistribute power, and continuous evaluation based on feedback and constant dialogue. As we mentioned before, Coopia learns by copying other practices. Coopia is copy in Spanish. Coopia does not seek to be unique, but to be appropriable and reproducible. An archivo is an open, non-categorical and transversal project that aims to connect a network by a platform of participatory processes with spatial attention to pedagogical resistance, community, network and social economy, and alternative housing practices. Initially, it is composed from a series of conversations, an open library and a web platform for open interaction to learn, share, and encourage conversations between past, present, and future practices that explore various forms of cooperation. So far, 22 conversations have been held in various practices that Coopia admires. Some conversations have been focused on spatial practices such as La Col, Cooperative of Architecture, Zuloarc, also an architectural practice, Palo Alto Cooperative Housing, Comunal, a Mexican architecture studio, and on pedagogical practices such as La Casa Invisible, El Rebozo Palapal, Unitierra o Axaca, among others. Committed to free access and circulation of knowledge, this library and reading lists are elaborated in an open and collective way. The lists, composed of different formats such as audio, video, and text, are intended to be an open and situated resource, not exhaustive. All those who wish to participate are invited to collaborate with resources, the reading list, as well as to read together. In the first exercise, which occurred last March, the theme of cooperation was addressed. In composing a common project, we are actually on constant recomposition of structures, methodologies, associates, and practices. This is an open practice where new members and practices are welcome at all times. We understand that Coopia transcends its own members, that the team changes and with them the forms of doing. In this idea of recomposition, we cooperate with other institutions and individuals to develop new practices and to work through mutual aid and transversality. We work through a non-linear path and through practices of action that create a link between the pedagogical and the decolonial. These constitute a constant process of composing and recomposing together. We understand practice as a field of reproduction, a transversal and circular movement between reflection or criticism and action, as a way to subvert the dichotomy between thinking and doing, and giving a situated approach to practice and embodied approach to theory. We understand transversality as a way to articulate knowledge, practice, and collective actions. We seek to experience practice as something that is produced through different outlooks, voices, knowledges, and decentralized ways of doing, communal and heterogeneous. Our work takes place through pedagogical practices and spatial practices and poses processes of co-design, co-management, and co-research, where the collective is irreducible. Coopia explores the political power of repetition, understood as the appropriation and transformation of knowledge, and the reconversion of thought, and defines spatialities to practice and transform spatialities. As Emma Goldman said, only when we are free to choose our associates for a common purpose can we expect order and harmony in this world of chaos and inequality. We understand cooperativism fundamentally as a pedagogical project through direct economic action. Coopia promotes and explores alternative models of ownership to collectivize space and resources. We look for new ways of working through association, autonomy, and horizontality, and consider that any form of political, economical, social, cultural, and material transformation of contemporary human and environmental conditions must begin in a radical transformation of work. Within Cooperate, we derive the 7 cooperative principles. The first one, open and voluntary membership, democratic control, economic participation, autonomy and self-management, multiple pedagogies, trans-cooperativism, and finally, commitment to the territory. We understand territory as fields of interaction between things, lives, subjects, machines, ecologies, and forces, as a multiplicity of fields and interactions that sustain our lives and modes of existence. A nomadic concept and assemblage that is in constant movement, change, and transformation. The transformation of a territory refers to the change of forms and through forms of being, the interaction between things, lives, subjects, machines, ecologies, and forces, among others. Coopia's cooperative practice is focused on the ethical, epistemological transformation of a territory. Understanding the tensions caused by it, we seek alternative models that promote spatial equity and inclusion. Our work project is a situated exercise that uses pedagogical practices and spatial practices which compose contemporary conditions and the assemblage of practices, discourses, processes, modes, things, and forms of life around forms.
We understand pedagogy as the field of collective action that can compose other forms of life, problematize, study, and transform territories. Through research, diverse formats of cultural production, and participatory action, we seek to articulate, learn, and collaborate with other people, as well as to explore other ways of practicing that operate outside institutional frameworks. Coopia articulates, learns, and collaborates with other agents and ways of practice to establish critical positions around the forms of production of space and the thinking about the modes of habitability, aiming to decentralize the research processes reproduced by traditional academy and to promote diverse ways of action and reflection, as mentioned before. The processes we developed at Coopia are carried out collectively, and some of these are writing, research, curatorship, editing, consulting, fieldwork, amongst others. These methodologies or processes result in diverse formats, such as workshops, laboratories, publications, texts, cartographies, public programming, exhibitions, and others. We understand spatial practices as a transversal assemblage of fields of work and ways of understanding, composing, and transforming the territory in a critical manner. We propose and design alternative forms that question the value chains and material ecologies of our environment. In these terms, we align ourselves with other situated practices, such as producción social del hábitat, that's social production of habitat here in Latin America, and we propose redistribution and exchange as forms of production and reject all forms of exploitation. We propose a more active and conscious participation in the extraction, transformation, and reuse of resources. The collective methodologies used in spatial practices are similar to those mentioned in pedagogical practices, resulting in spatial formats such as drawings, texts, cartographies, genealogies, exhibitions, spatial composition, building, graphic design, museography, among others. I will now present some projects that we have done through our short experience since 2019, and some that are still in the making. And this first project is a book that we're doing the whole editorial coordination and the graphic design. The book seeks to recognize and expose eco-barrios, those are eco-neighborhoods in English, or the eco-neighborhood movement in the territories now called Latin America, as a series of community alternatives capable of contributing to transitional processes towards urban sustainability. The book leads the reader through, firstly, the considerations prior to the concept of ecoaldeas, those are eco-villages. Secondly, to the influences of ecoaldeas on public policy, communal contributions, and last, through eco-barrios, eco-neighborhoods experiences in Colombia, Chile, and Ciudad de México. All this with the aim of proposing eco-neighborhoods as a transversal movement between public policies and self-managed resources that encourage transitional processes towards urban sustainability. In conclusion, the book collects significant cases of eco-barrios, of eco-neighborhoods in Latin America, and introduces the transition movement as a horizon for the present and futures. Hic sunt dracones is what cartographers said in the Middle Ages when they did not know what lay beyond the recognized territories. Sea serpents and other mythological creatures were drawn on maps. This next project, Acayajolotes, resignifies these creatures, these dragons, these mythological creatures, and situates the project in Ciudad de México. Ajolotes are salamanders endemic to Xochimilco Lake Complex, which includes the National Canal, formerly known as Acayajolotli. Acayajolotes seeks to carry out a series of activities and workshops that build a network between people, territories, towns, neighborhoods, and nearby areas along the canal. The project focuses on the community of people with cognitive disabilities who are often at risk of social exclusion. Through artistic and spatial practices, we seek to open the space for collective actions to a community that is often relegated from urban processes. Acaydragones was first initiated by Zuloarc in Spain with the intention of developing an open urbanism that includes everyone in urban debates and tasks. Acayajolotes is a spatial and artistic intervention project that seeks to empower people with cognitive disabilities and transform urban processes to include vulnerable groups in decision-making. It also seeks to generate new ways of weaving community ties with the territory. As mentioned before, we understand the territory as a socio-ecological construction composed of different agents, human and non-human, that co-inhabit and reconfigure these 12 kilometers of the Acayajolotli, now known as Canal Nacional or Canal de la Viga. There are records of the Acayajolotli dating back more than 2,000 years, making it possibly the oldest navigable canal in Latin America. It is a territory in constant movement, not only because of its hydric conditions, but also because of the active agents that are part of the community. The canal, as a hydric territory, was a means of communication between 2 points. In pre-colonial times, it connected Chalco on the south of Ciudad de México and Tenochtitlan in the center. And for centuries, it was a transportation and goods transfer surface until in the 20th century, due to rapid urbanization and in particular the construction of vehicular roads, several canals were piped or covered with cement, thus ceasing to be a means of transportation and becoming a remnant of biodiversity. This ecosystem, inhabited by ducks, herons, tilapias, carps, ajolotes, hydrophytes, algae, ferns, amongst many others, is shared by an active community of neighbors who in recent years have worked to turn the canal from a garbage dump to a site where self-managed community participation projects, academic projects, and government projects have come together. Is it possible to rethink design and build better spaces of coexistence between different neighboring communities? Can the public instances redesign their protocols to contribute to the co-production of urban projects involving the difference? Is it possible to design new ways of inhabiting the city in dialogue with the diverse communities and ecosystems that inhabit them? All these questions have been discussed through the project and through diverse actions. First, through collaboration, we propose to open ourselves to an environment of exchange, learn learning, collaboration, integration, and visibility, where we can think and create collective spaces together and around the Acayéotli. The proposal seeks to travel through and resignify and activate the territory, since inhabiting the space together helps us to better understand its identity and to approach the city from multiple perspectives. Through cooperation, collective activities that through games and ludic activities, we promote a balance between the capacity for individual initiative and the capacity for collective dialogue, listening, willingness, and the possibility of cooperation. The activities seek to promote solidarity among people and between people and the canal, as well as the spaces that border it, and in this way, re-understand and re-signify the hybrid territory from the possibilities of cooperation and solidarity. Through transversality and aesthetic practices from their creative and collective dimension, we have the power to compose new universes of references. In the world of disability, art builds habits, awakens observation, and produces changes in people, developing self-esteem and strengthening autonomy. And through spontaneity, we propose to share meetings of collaborative creation for 3 moments of ideation, production, and most importantly, celebration. The celebration of the proposal, which direct and articulate artistic practices and spatial practices towards an experimental urban recomposition or regeneration, which particularly attends to the water reconnection of the territory. This 3rd moment of collective celebration openly invites all interested agents to enjoy the results of this collaboration. La Banal is a public program project and space for research and collective action composed by several hands that can take many formats and many forms. In its beginning, the name alluded to a wordplay between biennial, as in an event celebrated or taking place every 2 years, and the word banal, as in trivial or little interest or importance. And it was founded as an alternative and mockery to the Colombian Architecture Biennale, and in general, to the biennalization of culture and its biennial institution as a space for dissemination, spectacularization, and consumption of cultural products. Today, La Banal veers away from the disciplinary idea of both art and architecture as a critique of how depressing and violent it can be in this moment of inequalities and oppressions, to insist on the spectacular and self-indulgent notion of the Biennale. As we have said, we believe labor is at the center of our existence, and that it should not be. For this reason, the second Banal proposes a space for research and collective action around the problematization of cultural labor from and through our direct experiences as cultural workers and within the Colombian context of the implementation of Economía Naranja, or Orange Economy, which is a primary project of the current government of Iván Duque. We will map the current platforms, work structures, and forms of association in Colombia, in the Colombian context, within the framework of the Orange Economy, in order to understand what it means to be a worker today and here, all this to propose other forms of doing. We think that if we understand how we work, for whom and why, perhaps we can also link or think about what forms of resistance to exploitation should accompany these new forms of work. Explore the collective and political power of doing nothing, doing less, the power of leisure, laziness, sabotage, and rejection. This is also an open invitation for you to donate to the project and help us make this come true. We will pass along the link in a few minutes. We're also compelled to problematize private property and real estate speculation, hence imagining and building other forms of housing grounded on solidarity. Since 2018, we have been working towards building relations and complicities around cooperative housing. One of the current challenges for social economies, autonomous, associative, and community projects is the composition of open networks aimed at working and learning in a transversal and joint manner. Compelled to cooperative modes of spatial production, we have approached and studied the cooperative housing movement in the territories now known as Latin America. From this permanent task of composition and alliances, Coopia has approached institutions such as Universidad Cooperativa de Colombia, that's the Cooperative University of Colombia. And from that correspondence relationship that began in 2018, we have done 2 projects. This complicity started within the framework of the first National Cooperative Housing Conference in Cali, Colombia, a meeting organized in alliance between Trascender Cooperative, its Sarachai project, and We Effect, an NGO, a Swedish NGO. After the conference, we were invited to participate in a Latin American seminar around social economy. And the aim of the seminar was to review various theories and practices related to the development of social economies in Latin America and the influence of public policies in this process. The seminar concluded with the international colloquium that had as its central theme the social and solidarity economy in Latin America. We participated with an ongoing research on associative housing, and for this event, we presented a paper on public policy and associative housing models between Mexico and Colombia, which addressed a comparative framework between public policies on access to housing, obstacles, opportunities, and intercooperation movements, focusing on the Uruguayan Federation of Housing Cooperatives by Mutual Aid, FUCBAM. Studying its movement and model structure on three axes, self-management, mutual aid, and collective property, as well as its intercooperation project that has promoted multiple internationalist processes of access to housing in Latin America. Our research has pointed out to some very basic conclusions, but if addressed, cooperative housing in both Mexico and Colombia could advance at a different pace. FUCBAM's strength relies on a tripartite federative movement based first on cooperatives that group individuals and groups interested in the self-management of their habitat. Second, cooperatives that develop housing projects. And third, cooperatives that group communities based on their modes of property. Both Mexico and Colombia are missing such a structure and, most importantly, proper mechanisms for informing communities and individuals on the possibilities of cooperative housing. This is why we have started meeting with different agents around the cooperative movement and social production of habitat, such as the paradigmatic case of Palo Alto in Ciudad de México, and the recently established group Chico Hace Cali. We have also started to plan modes not only of advocacy, but most importantly, learning moments around associative housing models. For this, we're composing a study group seminar moment for collective learning with Confiar, a savings cooperative in Colombia, on associative housing practices, backgrounds, and possibilities in Colombia. Is a laboratory and study group that seeks to study, share, and collectively imagine diverse forms of self-management and production of associative housing in the territory now known as Colombia, from a situated, genealogical, and practical perspective. This laboratory seeks to problematize the forms of housing production that reproduce real estate speculation, individualism, and privilege the patrimonial function of housing, and discourage associative forms of housing production or tenure, in order to share and promote other forms of habitat production. In this sense, the laboratory studies, shares, and imagines the collective habitat from the following dimensions: the genealogies of the collective habitat, modes of production of the collective habitat, and disputes, autonomies, and public policies of the collective habitat. The laboratory concludes by presenting the challenges and possibilities that associative housing in Colombia must face based on autonomy as the main protagonist. Asymmetric Spatialities, Architectures of Inequality, is a project that studies and problematizes the asymmetries present in the colonial transformation of the territory. We frame coloniality as the socio-environmental asymmetric power relations present in the domination of authority, knowledge, and being, imposed by the modern, colonial, capitalist, patriarchal world system. Through experimentation with different pedagogical formats, we seek to resignify these power structures in search of decolonial practices that allow us to act in direct and transversal manners in the transformation of the territory. Through three ecologies, macro, meso, and micro, the socio-ecological territory is studied and problematized with the intention of recognizing and sharing those decolonial practices that allow deglobalization, deurbanization, and desubjectivation. The first version of this laboratory was carried out thanks to the invitation and through the virtual platform of Museo Tamayo in Ciudad de México. And throughout 5 weeks, we talked with various guests, such as Ana Maria León, Daniela Lieja, Metlab, Tania Osorio, and Yasser Farres. And as a result, in a collaborative disposition with the participants and guests, lecturers, we're working on a collective publication that explores the themes reviewed in the laboratory. Its second iteration, Asymmetric Spatialities, an Introduction to Territorial Decoloniality, which is just about to start in a few weeks, is the second version of the laboratory that transversely studies coloniality and decoloniality. As mentioned, we seek to problematize technologies of socio-environmental transformation, such as architecture, that operate from and through three ecologies. A macroecology made up of natural and social assemblages, a mesoecology that is made up of social and trans-individual assemblages, and a microecology made up of modes of being. Through conversation with guests, readings, drawings, cartographies, and case studies, we will find ourselves in a non-hierarchical disposition, and we'll study together about how spatial practices reproduce diverse forms of discrimination, inequity, and exclusion. Through this project, we ask, how is coloniality spatialized and territorialized? What are the technologies of socio-environmental coloniality? How have these technologies been problematized, and how can we undo them? What decolonial practices are present in our territories in order to undo the world we live in and to share, imagine, and compose other futures and other worlds?
Okay, not as a closure, but rather as a transition from this long monologue that we did to a collective conversation with you all, we would like to quickly address some of the questions posed by this invitation. How does architecture become relevant for and in a society today? And the two sub-questions, how does a spatial design shape societal relationships, and how could a spatial practitioner contribute responsibly and potently into the emerging complexities of spatial operation today? We believe architecture is very relevant today. The problem is that it's not relevant for society, but for an economy, since capitalism as an economic system has captured society, reducing it to an economy. In this sense, architecture is very relevant as a tool for spatializing capitalism. It allows the materialization of financial speculation and the increase of power relations. So, in line with the invitation and the series of talks, we would like to open up this discussion to other modes of spatial practices or other modes of spatializing that refuse the capitalist assumption of the current architecture. Also, we refuse architecture and its current relevance. We would like to call provisionally the revolts of spatial doings against architectural labor in order to compose new complicities, in order to imagine, share, and build multiple worlds, multiple spatialities grounded on the common. We understand the common as the integral flow of practices, affects, things, and places that reunite us from the ethics of reciprocity, from solidarity, mutual aid, and the harmonious coexistence of differences. The communal as modes of collaboration, association, and cooperation, and the community as associations, configurations, and processes in constant transformation that arise through relations of doing in common. Let's embrace instead the revolts of spatial doings, and let's compose collectively agency through complicities. Let's open up to new labor smoothness in order to compose new fields of alliances through multiple cartographies of cooperation. So thank you so much, gracias. And now we would like to open up the conversation, and well, if you have any questions or something to say, well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Claudio, Felipe, and Maria. You know, I was actually kind of trying to situate myself in the context that you are practicing in throughout your presentation, and although you did speak about, you know, in some sense a kind of manifesto-like tone of Coopia, I was trying to find the specificities of how is cooperation kind of mobilized in your practice? What are the difficulties that because when we say that we want to work in a cooperative model, we all know that even any cooperative model has a series of negotiations even within it. So it's not as if it's a kind of safe and secure and stable space to be in. So I was kind of trying to understand what are the contours of cooperation, achieving cooperation in your practice, and what are some of the field experiences, if you can share, in mobilizing certain projects.
Maybe I can take this first one. I would answer from two experiences in terms of cooperation. I think it's fundamental for Coopia, our like inside cooperation and then inter-cooperation with other agents. And in that sense, cooperation is always, as you said, in dialogue, no? In constant movement and in constant agreements. And in that sense, at least for us in Coopia, this notion of transversality has been fundamental, because it really doesn't exist, this notion of complete horizontality, no, in which we're all the same. So transversality in that sense has been very important for us, because in a way it rejects complete verticality, so complete hierarchical models, but it also recognizes that there are agreements and there are power structures that we can redistribute rather than refuse. So in that sense, we see transversality as this movement between vertical structures and horizontal structures within Coopia. And in that sense, as we mentioned, sociocracy has been fundamental also as a governance tool in how to make decisions, in how to make agreements, in how to have roles. So we have several roles within the cooperative. There's people that coordinate, there's people that facilitate, there's people that take notes, etc. We have different roles. And also the way in which all the, let's say, collective intelligence is somehow articulated. No? So we work in groups or circles, as we call them, and each group and circle has a specific task or objective. No? So we have a theory circle, we have a planning circle, we have a project circle, we have like media and network circle, etc. So I would say that towards or within Coopia. And then we have the same experience with other agents, and in that sense, it has been incredible in this short experience of 2 years or year and a half of kind of moving through along the social economy networks, which we were not in them, not through social economy or cooperatives. And it has been amazing to witness the reciprocity of such networks, solidarity of those networks, and that's why we insist on this notion of the complicity, because each conversation leads up to a new opportunity, to some solidarity, so to a project. And in that sense, it's always a negotiation between modes of cooperation, between our mode of inner cooperation and their mode of cooperation. So it's always this constant dialogue of complicities.
So what if you may enlist some, what are the points of conflicts? And I'm coming from a space where I want to understand that why was the need for something like Coopia to be formed in a space like Latin America, and the fact that you all are operating from different places, and how do you kind of therefore intervene in space? Because I mean, I'm talking because there was this term that you constantly kind of kept referring back to, the idea of commitment to territory, commitment to territoriality, and certainly you are mobilizing it in a very kind of conceptual way, and you all are in some sense deterritorialized. So how do you kind of bring it in your practice? How do you kind of orient to this dimension of territoriality while still being in different points in space?
Yes, I would say that first of all, the creation of Coopia has to do with I would say a discontent with the disciplines that we were formed in, let's say. And in a way with that, and also with a call to participate from within the founders, we established, first of all, this ethos, these 4 principles that in a way stabilizes all the first possible differences between the participants. And of course, we know that it's not enough to discuss the problems, but of course it's really necessary to try to intervene and try to materialize spatial operations in the territory. But for doing that, I would say that we have to define also a conceptual territory in order to organize ideas. So in a way, I would say that Coopia in these first, let's say, years, conceptualizes territory as a set of ideas or notions in order to establish, first of all, a structure within the project, within Coopia. And of course, due to the pandemic and due to this kind of diaspora of people around Latin America, is still a little bit difficult to start operating in space. But I would say that we are trying to do that, moving away from the heritage of our disciplines, the heritage of architecture. So I would say that it's a little bit difficult to create, let's say, nominal or really important operations in space. But I would say that little by little we will achieve that. We will, through complicities or through reaching out to other organizations, maybe that are more located in specific territories, we will be able to start spatializing and start making the transformation that we always communicate through operations in space.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I think Prasad wants to make a point. Can we have Prasad?
Can I add something to that question?
Sure. Yes.
I just wanted to add some anecdotes and history from the process, which wasn't explicit in our presentation. But initially, Coopia started as an open call for anyone interested in composing and joining an architecture cooperative. So 2 years ago, we started from this notion of building architecture cooperative. And as you said, Anuj, it's sort of, we give this end of this manifesto-like presentation, but I would agree to some extent in the extent that it manifests, it makes evident something, but it's not a manifesto in the sense that it's a static manifesto. No, it's not a compromise that we're making. But as Claudio mentioned, the only structure that we have until now are those 4 principles. So in these 2 years, for example, some of the first refusals was refusing architecture and said, fuck architecture, this is not what we want to do, or at least know how we want to do it. But we had those, or we were compelled to spatial problematics and territorial problematics. Hence, this territory being always, and the transformation of the territory being always in our practice.
Thanks. Yes, Prasad. Prasad, you're mute.
Yeah, thanks, Felipe, Claudio, and Maria. I think that energy is very special actually. Coopia's energy and the belief in cooperation and network is very special, and I think there is something to learn from this belief and trust in this cooperation and network. Actually, for us here in India, it's very important. I have 2 or 3 observations, because we are also kind of, struggling with rethinking the idea of institutions and pedagogies, and these are the places where we are stuck, and I would like to kind of discuss it with the 3 of you and Coopia. The idea of proximity, proximity in space when it comes to cooperation. The projects that we do in spatial terms, in place, in territories, these are all spatial, and for example, you all are sitting in Colombia, in Lima, in Mexico, at 3 different places and probably slightly different times. And we are talking of spatiality, space, a specific place. Now, I'm finding it difficult to kind of, and this is a difficulty because that experience of space as a place, because there is this space between us is there, between the space of the network is quite active, but we are finding it difficult to kind of, think of place in this cooperation, and then if we are unable to identify with place, then as partial practitioners, as architects or planners, how does one kind of, think about space in those terms? Connected to this is another observation, and this is also where we are kind of stuck. The question of paradigm. For example, we speak of cartographies, we speak of ethnographies. We at C feel that it is the frameworks within cartographies and ethnographies that is kind of pushing us in a specific direction. So when you say, when you speak about the problems with capitalism probably kind of, expresses itself through cartographies, through an understanding which is kind of, which is distanced. And I think there a paradigmatic shift in probably looking at things might be, in our kind of, experience to kind of, move ahead with this. Lastly, questions are very special, I say. Here in India, we kind of, we in last 50 years or 70 years, we've been kind of, we've been kind of struggling with a kind of socialism, a soft socialism, which is kind of, is a very, very strange kind of, in the earlier years yet, but in the last 30 years, it's kind of, eroded in a very, very different way. And we see a very thick middle class which is emerging, which wants to maintain status quo, which doesn't want to change, which doesn't want to kind of, wants to work with systems, wants to kind of, which is fair and which is kind of, and the encounters with the positions that one takes with respect to changing of systems, those encounters get violent, and how does one kind of deal with that, actual but also conceptual violence, so that kind of encounter with kind of trying to shake the status quo, because then we have to kind of shift and shake the status quos through which these systems operate, and those systems, those status quos kind of come back to the ideas of families, ideas of they come back to the idea very permanence, and they come back to these ideas. How does one kind of work them out and kind of reshape? These are the questions that we are also thinking through, and we feel that it is a paradigmatic embedding, the way we kind of the methods of seeing, the ways of engaging. I think those frameworks require a shifting, and that is where work needs to be done. Actually, we like kind of dismantle the idea, configure the academia. Today, academia means university, and university means very high kind of bureaucracy. Dismantle that. How do we kind of dismantle it? How do we reconstitute it? How do we kind of rethink it? So I think see this energy to kind of and we'll definitely, I think we'll figure out ways to kind of meet each other sometime. Yeah, that is the observation. Any response?
Thank you for that comment, Prasad. I think those are collective struggles and shared struggles, and questions that we have been also thinking and acting through them, or at least that's our intention. Maybe I will try to maybe comment in order some of your questions and detonations. I think that maybe to connect your first comment and the last one regarding academia and university, this is something that we have been struggling also collectively in Coopia and also individually, because many of us teach in different contexts, in universities, in architectural schools, in economy, in psychology, and that's something we didn't mention in our presentation. But nowadays, Coopia is composed not only of architects, but we have people coming from psychology, from economy, from sociology, from pedagogy. So this kind of makes the mix of Coopia and how we approach also the institutionalization of education. And in that sense, we highly refuse the notion of education and teaching and embrace this notion of learning, no? And we're fully committed to learning in a collective way, and kind of decentering the teacher position and figure, and embracing this collective student figure. And that's what we have been trying to do in all our projects. And I would say it's the university a struggle. It's a world or a planetary struggle. No, it has become a planetary structure that it has colonized all education formats. So the university is, I mean, it's very forward, no, with its own term. No, it's universal. It wants to unify one verse. It wants to unify one world, one mode of teaching, one mode of comprehending. So in that sense, I think that decolonial discourses and decoloniality, at least in our context, is very potent. From indigenous movements, indigenous discourses in Latin America, and there's this very beautiful notion of pluriversality, no, of the multiple verses, of the multiple modes of doing, and that's something that we want to embrace, and that we're compelled. And I would tie that to your second comment on the paradigm shift and the system, no, and capitalism as a universal system again, no, and we tend to think that we would need another system, and I think that there relies also a struggle to kind of multiply the systems, no, the opportunities, the worlds, the modes of doing, which we understand this as this like harmonious coexistence of difference. No, how can we harmoniously coexist with multiplicity, with difference, rather than with another hegemonic system? And I think that's the challenge for all, for professions, for disciplines, for space, for our futures. So I think it's this embracement of multiplicity and difference, of pluriversality.
I think Rupali wanted to add a point here. Dipti, can you help us get Rupali on the panel?
Sorry, can I add something also
Sure,
to
Claudia.
Felipe's response? No, because I found extremely interesting the points that Prasad raised. And I wanted to try to punctualize in the first one and the second one, because the first part of your question or your first comment was basically pointing out how to really operate in space. Because we mentioned lots of things, but we didn't maybe show enough of our participation in space. And regarding the second notion of paradigm, I would say that there's also a really strict paradigm of architect or model of architect. And we have to, in a way, dismantle that paradigm, because in reality, the architect operates in a set of conditions that others put in your way, let's say, and you operate in those conditions. But in order to be coherent in this, let's say, narrative, and in order to operate in space, I would say that the architect has to work in a way of sort of Trojan horse. The architect has to construct those conditions in order to try to put on the table this, let's say, dimension of autonomy of the institutions that in reality set up those conditions. So I would say that, of course, it's extremely important to learn to operate in space, but maybe more important in this time in history is how to operate through or as political actors in order to construct a really specific kind of conditions in order to create some kind of fracture inside the system and operate through that fracture in the system and try to really make the transformation in space.
Yes,
maybe I add something short to that, but there's also something interesting that we have discussing inside Coopia, and is the struggles not only through spatial terms, but through temporal terms. No, how can we make something happen, especially if we think towards urban autonomy, in which access to space is very limited. No, if we think of access to space in autonomy in let's say rural Mexico is different. No, there's more space, there's communal property, etc. But what about the city? And in that sense, we've been discussing a lot about the temporality of the autonomy, no, or the temporality of action, and those spaces that can suddenly erupt, collectivize, and then they can change. No, so I think the temporality of those spaces is also fundamental.
Yes, Rupali, if you want to come in.
Yeah. So thanks so much for the presentation, and really kind of interesting to see, this kind of mode of friendship. No, I mean, there's a cooperative that holds 18 people together is quite special, So I just kind of also thinking of, I mean, your presentation, the way you began the presentation with this kind of really the sense of conviviality, right? There was the dance that happened, and I'm just kind of wondering from there to think of really what are the toolboxes that we have to decolonize knowledge. Does the convivial space somehow sort of provide us ways in which we sort of you intervene? It reminds me of this kind of, I think he's a legal scholar and an economist, Santos, the Portuguese writer Boaventura de Souza Santos, and he talks about this idea of, again, decolonizing knowledge by thinking of ways of not kind of, thinking of the techno-legal. Rather than that, you sort of engage with, softer ideas of stories, for example, the orality of cultures, rather than hard sort of idea of the techno-legal, which has come from, colonial frameworks, So I'm just saying that what are some of those toolboxes that we have then to work with decolonizing knowledge? And I think there's a lot to be kind of learned from, kind of the multiverses that you speak about, to kind of, maybe not, think of hegemony in the sense, the kind of de-hegemonizing in the sense of, a kind of binary opposite, because the binary opposite sometimes turns out to be as violent, but really kind of refracting from the smithereens of the, breaking, and creating, new energies from each of those fragments. So I think I'm just thinking of like, what are then the tools through which you decolonize knowledge and spatiality and things like that. So yeah.
Maybe I can say something. Well, from my very short experience since I graduated from university, I think maybe for me, the transdisciplinary experience of knowing other like knowledges from other practitioners or professionals, maybe that has helped me to view my career as something different for the things that I have been told or taught in university, because I think the way architecture is taught is very, I don't know, like closed, like only focused on some things that when you graduate and enter to the real world, you know that it's not true, that maybe in the field that we work in the territories, in the spatial practice, you have to manage a lot of other conditionants or well, knowledge. So it's very important to know everything or to be connected with other types of knowledge. And I think for me, that's been a very big failure in the academia, or maybe in the way I was like taught, but I don't know. It's my opinion.
Maybe I would like to add something on that, and maybe emphasize on the dash between many of the concepts that we mentioned that have the prefix of trans, so transversal, transformation, transdisciplinary, and in that sense, it has been a very potent tool, let's say, maybe to answer in your question, and understanding this prefix and these actions and modes of understanding and modes of doing that can traverse, that can interact, that can cross between things, that can cross between discourses, that can cross us. And in that sense, we do understand all these concepts through that prefix of the trans. And we have, we're compelled to different understandings within Coopia now, to transgender associates that are really committed to gender, those that are committed to transdisciplinarity because they're committed to knowledge and learning, those that are committed to spatiality and they do understand this transformation as other forms that can change, or the change of forms. So I think that has been a very powerful tool for us in Coopia. I'm super happy also that you mentioned conviviality, because it has also been a very powerful tool, especially from the Mexican context, reading and also meeting people that have been using conviviality and that were kind of reading and acting and learning through Iván Illich in Cuernavaca and in Oaxaca. And in that sense, it's also very important for us, I would say, listening. And this first project that Claudio showed us, an archivo, it's fundamental for Coopia, because we would say that Coopia, the main project of Coopia is Coopia itself, no? How can we think about Coopia and do Coopia? And in that sense, an archivo has been very important, because all of us, or none of us, had any experience whatsoever in cooperativism 2 years ago. We all came from highly conventional labor structures, from architectural offices, from academia. And that project, an archivo, was this way of opening ourselves to uncertainty, to fragility, and listening to other practices. And I think listening is also a fundamental tool to learn, and hence also the name of the co-op, which is Coopia, and this mode of listening others and learning from others and extracting from others with any regard to private property, just expropriate whatever we can find and repeat it. So I think listening is also an important tool in that sense.
Yeah. Great, thanks so much. Thank you for your answers. You can take other questions I can leave from here, and hope to be in touch with you.
We don't have any more questions in the Q&A box. And I mean, if there's anyone who wants to kind of come in with any thoughts, comments, are welcome. I'll just wait for a minute. Shreyank, yes.
Yeah, hi. Hey, thanks, guys. I think it was wonderful to listen to you and see some of those really funny but provocative memes, and to see memes as an important practice to think about space. I think it's quite interesting to see that developing. I had maybe two questions. One is probably one is a little bit more, let's say, so to speak, whatever, technical. And the other is, I want to maybe understand a little bit more, because I remember, Felipe, you mentioning the context in which the book that you're putting together around the eco-villages was triggered by this person who was part of the movements, and then I think something to do around his health conditions. So maybe something that, if you guys can shed some light around, the coming together of that project. And then the other question that I had was a little bit more, let's say, so to speak, technical, is this notion of the embodied approach to theory, which is I found it quite interesting actually, because usually there is this assumption that theory is something that is only meant for the thinking faculty, in the sense our brains, and then experience is something that is meant, which is supposed to be embodied, and practice in that sense truly belongs to the faculty of the embodied experience and not so much to the questions of theory. You know what I'm saying? The distinction between theory and practice sort of also carries that difference between thinking, doing, the difference between embodiment, the know-how, the know that, or the know what, right? So that difference. I just wanted to maybe open up with these two questions. Yeah, thanks.
Maybe I can take the anecdote from the book that I mentioned. A private conversation with Shrank a few months ago. But so this book started from an incredible experience by Alberto Ruz. He's a Mexican ecologist who traveled in a bus all Latin America along 12 years. So he crossed from Mexico to Argentina, and he was kind of doing this eco-political preaching tour. So he was moving with this bus, and he was based in different cities, and he stayed for a while, and he was doing workshops on peace movements, on ecology and permaculture. And at the end, so we started in Mexico, went down to Argentina, and then back again. And he ended up in Bogotá, in Colombia. And that's when he came to know the eco barrios or eco neighborhoods movement, which was very powerful at the time in Bogotá, because it was not only a community project, but they were able to have some public policies through that government at the time. That was, I think, 2010. So that's how let's say the eco barrio, eco neighborhood movement reached Mexico. So after Bogotá, and he started this book 12 years ago, kind of putting experiences through his journey in the bus in Latin America, and his experience in Bogotá in Colombia, and in Mexico. He had the chance to do a 2-year program, not of eco neighborhoods, but they will call that so eco neighborhoods promoters. So how can you form and kind of circulate knowledge to other people in order for them to promote eco neighborhoods in their communities? So that was a 2-year program, and at the end, he had this idea of the book. It kind of stagnated for 10 years, and then last year he reached us. He's in very bad health conditions, and he said, I have this urgent need for a book. I want this to be for like open access, to collectivize all these experiences. And that's kind of the way how the book started. And we've been working for a year with him and Casa Latina, who is the Latin American Council for Sustainable Habitat. And they have like this eco-village network and eco-neighborhood network. And they, with Coopia and Alberto, we're doing the coordination, the editorial coordination. And maybe just a brief mention to your second question, and I will leave the space for Camila and Claudio. There's this beautiful saying by the Zapatistas here in Mexico, and it's no theory without practice and no practice without theory. And it's exactly that, like meeting point or praxis, no? That meeting point between theory and action, or theory and practice. And in that sense, I think in Coopia, it's very diverse, no? We have associates that are more compelled to theory and those that are more compelled to practice. And it's actually that cooperation within Coopia that makes the praxis of those come together, no? We don't do anything without theory, we don't theorize anything without doing. And in that sense, we have, for example, this 2 projects that we're working on now. We didn't show them because they're very recent. But this notion of how can we deprofessionalize ourselves, no? And how can we deprofessionalize our doings? And we're committed to spatial problematics, to spatial agency, to cooperative agency. And in that sense, we have 2 projects that are kind of exploring other modes of doing. One through food. So how can we do through food? How can we come together through food? And that, in a way, kind of binds together theory and practice again. Also in a more embodied, as you said, praxis, because it's an urgent need, and we all eat. We all are aware of like the needs in terms of food in the planetary sense. And another one, which maybe Camila can talk more, it's regarding ludic systems or play. No, how can we somehow bring play, this notion of play and playing and cooperating through play?
Yeah, we currently are working in a card game that is based in intimacy, sexuality, and the territory as in different scales. Like the first scale would be the body, our body, and the relationship of our body with others. And the second scale is the relationship of our body with the territory, like the space of architecture or any territory. And we are learning, and this is a very long project and process in which we are learning how to do pedagogical things with the game, and learning about our bodies and our sexuality and our interests, and maybe some things about gender and various topics about, or maybe various topics that Coopia is very interested in. And we are trying to use this game as a tool to teach, or to maybe learn or unlearn things we have been taught in the capitalist and patriarchal system.
I would like to comment a little bit on the second comment from Shreyank. My first comment is that maybe it's too obvious, but as Felipe mentioned, we didn't have any experience on cooperative practices or cooperativism. So we immediately needed to start reading theory about that, and at the same time started to practicing those principles, let's say. And in that sense, I think that sociocracy is also really important in order to try to unify all these different professionals or the ideological backgrounds of every participant in Coopia, every associate. So in a functional way, it was exactly a mixture or a simultaneous exercise of theorizing and practicing in order to maintain, let's say, Coopia moving forward. And on another level, I also remember our first project that had to do with the notion of unsustainable city or sustainable city. And I remember that we were, again, different, we were, I think, 5 of different backgrounds, and terminology was also a quite important thing in order to articulate ideas. So problematizing terminology from different theoretical backgrounds was also a really interesting task and necessary task in order to, let's say, set a common ground or a transversal theory in all our, let's say, understandings, right, of knowledge.
I would add something to that, comment by Claudio, and it's also this challenge to kind of build discursive and effective bonds, because many of us have never worked before within ourselves. So we had this challenge on how could we start building effective and discursive bonds. And I think it's very important, this mention of the terminology that Claudio mentioned. And we actually have a Coopia lexicon, no? So we do have an archive in which we are constantly defining, for example, what Coopia is, what territory is, because we might say territory is this now, and tomorrow we would say another thing. And that's also very important for ourselves in kind of understanding each other. How can we sort of compose this new lexicon, this Coopia lexicon, in which we understand ourselves? And there's another challenge in which, how can we make ourselves understandable for others? And that was at the beginning a huge challenge, because we started talking, no one understand what we were saying. And I think we're kind of slowly moving towards a more comprehensible vocabulary, but there's a lot of work to do yet. But yeah, I think it's important as meeting points, and how can we actually compose this effective and discursive bonds through words.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Actually, you opened up a lot of things suddenly for me to think about. And I think there are no more questions. So I would take this opportunity to, in some sense, summarize and sum up through, what were my takeaways from your presentation. I think it was very interesting to see in your presentation the emphasis on equalizing, as a way of opening up new worlds. And you indicated that in the idea of decolonizing, in the idea of multiversing, and further your own model of the horizontal setup, and working through the kind of instrument of cooperatives, and also believing in transforming the world into a more cooperative kind of model. So I think it was a very interesting way of thinking of equalizing as something that will actually open up new worlds and not create, not create sameness, but rather equalizing will create many, many new worlds, which was a very powerful kind of thing that came through your, presentation. The second is the movement in order to equalize. I think the movement that you suggested into a mode of transdisciplinarity, which Maria brought out, to number one, chart out new sociographies, like you mentioned, but also creating new lexicons for your own practice. I think to dive into another discipline and kind of constantly be in dialogue with that practice in order to harvest, lexicons for your own ways of practice. I think that's very powerful in this cooperative model, because you are not bounded so much by your disciplinary kind of bounds. So that was a very interesting kind of movement that I observed. And the third one, which you mobilize directly in your practice, is these everyday social activities as strategies of spatial intervention. You mentioned about playing as a strategy, eating or talking or listening or even learning together. I think these everyday social activities often get neglected as instruments which hold power, and those which can actually be used to dissolve, dissipate, or deflect, in some sense, deep-seated hegemonies in social space, which actually your practice kind of very closely engages with. So I think these are the three things that I felt were very nicely kind of came through the conversation that we had after your presentation. So thank you so much for leaving us with these ideas, Claudio, Felipe, and Maria, and the entire team of Coopia. definitely try to be in touch with all of you, and we'll keep a lookout on your trajectory and your experiments with cooperativism in that sense. So thank you so much for joining us for this discussion, and I hope that that we meet sometime soon in physical space also. So thank you so much. I want to just inform our audience that our next lecture is scheduled for next week, and we'll meet the details of which will be uploaded and updated on our website. So please do join us for the next session. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Anush.
Thanks.
Thank you, Anush.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.